Hello everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and the book that I'll be talking about today is a little different than what I usually talk about, as it hasn't been reprinted since being published in 1932 and then translated into German in 1937. I discovered this book when I stayed at a convent for a few days, as this was the only book that I was given back then. And at first I wasn't too excited about it because it is printed in Fraktur, also called Gothic style, and I can show you. I'm not sure if you can see this. And that's a little hard to read. But as it was the only book that I had, I decided to read it, and I actually didn't finish the book at that convent. But as I really liked it, I bought a copy for myself, which turned out to be easier said than done, because there have only been printed 5,000 copies of this book, at least of the German translation from 1937. Anyways, I hold it in my hands now, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about it in this video. The author is Father Joseph Schreibers, who was a member of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, and the book has an imprimatur of the Archdiocese of Freiburg im Breisgau, which means that it is declared to be free from doctrinal and moral error. The title in German, Vertraue meine Seele, means trust my soul, and the original title in French is Les âmes confiantes, which means the trusting souls. There is no English translation of this book, and the only book by Father Joseph Schreibers that has been reprinted and translated into English is called The Gift of Oneself, which I haven't read yet, but the author seems to be very underrated. And I also read a review on the internet where someone said that The Gift of Oneself is among their top 3 favorites, which I absolutely believe, and I will definitely read that other book as well. Now let's get to the content of the book. The author opens the book with the question whether it's possible to reach perfection for you, the reader. And here he explains that it is possible with absolute certainty, but only if you put your trust in God and not yourself. Father Joseph then gives 3 reasons to trust in God. First, because of his goodness. Second, because of his omnipotence. And third, because of his faithfulness, as he always keeps his promises. He explains each of these reasons on a few pages, which actually was my favorite chapter in the book. Then the author adds that trust without prayer will be little helpful, as it says in John 16:24, ask and you will receive. In Matthew 7:7, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. And also in Matthew 21:22, if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. So here the condition to be heard is to ask for it in prayer. And Father Joseph explains how to pray. He says in particular that we should only pray for things that are somehow related to our ultimate goal, which is sanctity, as God will only grant us wishes that are in some relation to our sanctification, as everything else is either vain or sinful. That doesn't mean that we can't ask for temporal goods, but we should remember to only ask for those temporal goods on the condition that they serve our eternal salvation. For example, we don't know if health or sickness is better for our soul. He also quotes Matthew 6:33, where it says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. We also shouldn't ask to become martyrs, apostles, etc., as that is not the right and sanctifying way for everyone. If we should pray for it, as it is our vocation, God will let us know at the right time. Father Joseph also reminds us that God has not promised to listen to us when and how we want it, but when and how he wants. The author then talks about contemplative prayer, which he defines as the application of love. And here he explains that only voluntary distraction during prayer displeases God, as it's not a problem if it's hard for us to focus, as long as we try to focus, because God looks only at our intention. Father Joseph also gives the reader the advice to always ask God for the grace to love more. As Saint Therese of Lisieux once said, merit does not consist in doing or giving much, it consists in loving much. Father Joseph writes that we can make our daily tasks more valuable by uniting ourselves with Mary when we do them, which will improve our ability to perform the task. And after uniting ourselves with Mary, we should offer up our work to Jesus, which will increase the value of the task. The author explains that the more humble a soul becomes, the more similar it becomes to God. And he compares that to the making of a photograph, but here it has to be said that the book was written in 1932, and so photographs were made differently back then, especially the process took longer. This process of becoming more humble has 3 stages: the inner purification, the enlightenment in the spiritual life, and union with God. He stresses the fact that the first stage, so the purification, is never completed on earth. Regarding the 3rd stage, the author also writes that we cannot imagine what Jesus could do in us if we united our will with his will completely. He also called those 3 stages humility of the spirit or of the mind, humility of the heart, and humility in the exterior life. Humility of the spirit or of the mind means to not be taking credit for any of God's gifts. And here he quotes St. Augustine, who once said that the donkey that our Lord chose to come to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday would have been very foolish to believe that the palm leaves and clothes were thrown on the ground in his honor, as it was obviously to honor Jesus and not the donkey. Father Joseph explains that we do have credit and responsibility for our deeds, but we must distinguish our part from God's part. Then the 2nd stage, which is humility of heart, he defines that as recognizing and accepting our, quote, misery. And a comparison he makes here that I really like is that the kingdom of heaven is a family, and in a family, apart from the father and the mother, there are only the children. And here he is referring to Matthew 18:3, where it says, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And lastly, there is humility in the exterior life, where he explains that as we have accepted our misery in the previous stage, it would be a contradiction if we were offended when someone treated us accordingly, so miserably. But he warns us that speaking badly of oneself isn't the right solution here, as by doing that, we might do it in order for others to admire our humility, or we might be simply fishing for compliments. He quotes St. Francis de Sales, who gave the advice to speak of oneself as little as possible. After the chapter on humility, the author talks about self-denial, where he gives more advice on how to reach the humility described in the previous chapter. For example, he warns the reader of the danger of spiritual education, and here he doesn't say that Catholics should stay uneducated and naive, but he warns us to not put studying before prayer and to not make a cult out of the intellect, as we might forget our dependence on God that way. He explains that a philosopher can know a lot about God with his intellect without actually acting accordingly and improving his life. Even the devil knows God and doesn't love him. Now let's get to my opinion on the book. I honestly wish this book would get reprinted, as I believe that it contains valuable information for every Christian. I also didn't summarize everything that I found interesting and helpful in that book. For example, I left out the explanation on the gifts of the Holy Spirit and how we can use them. So you see that this book is a hidden treasure of Catholic education and edification. I also like that he quotes the Bible a lot. So in total, I would give the book at least a 9 out of 10, and obviously most of you won't be able to read it as there is no English version, but I hope that you gained a little insight into the book with this video. That's been it for today. See you next week. God bless and bye!